to be here today to help lead such an important conversation that I hope can continue beyond this hour using some of the tactics and approaches that you'll learn from our great speakers. The two speakers we have joining us for this part of the series have made a huge impact here in Greater Baltimore, so we're very excited to have them. We have Shauna Potter of Hollaback, Baltimore, and Cherie Wilson, MA, MHS, CPHQ, Program Manager for Education, Training, and Scholarship in the Johns Hopkins Medicine, Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity. That is a mouthful. So thank you both so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with Emerging Leaders United. We would love to learn a little bit more about each of your journeys and to your current work on disrupting harassment in our communities. So could you each share a little bit about your story, beginning with what led you to your work? Start with Shauna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. At some point, I realized that the harassment I was facing as a woman when I walked down the street was something that affected other people too. I was young and I thought the world revolved around me. And eventually I learned that that's not the case and that so many people have to deal with identity-based harassment and violence. And when I just got so fed up that I couldn't take it anymore, I decided to start my own Hollaback chapter. And Hollaback is an international organization geared towards ending harassment for everyone. So I started the Baltimore chapter in 2010. And through that, I've talked to countless people. I've trained venues to become safer spaces. I've held bystander intervention workshops. Basically, I just tell people how they can respond to harassment, whether they're the person experiencing harassment, or they're a witness, or they're in some sort of position of power. And then just a year or so ago, I wrote a book called Making Spaces Safer, which is a full guidebook based on my years of training spaces. So if you want to know how to DIY safer spaces, this book is for you. And that's what brings me here today. Thank you again for having me.
Great. Thank you for that, Shauna. That was fantastic. So again, my name is Cherie Wilson, and I come to this work because, yes, having experienced harassment, whether it's microaggressions, the look, inappropriate behavior, oftentimes when it happens to us or when we witness it, we simply don't know what to do. So I'm so glad that Shauna has put together this guidebook and started the Hollaback chapter in 2010. Much of my work surrounds how does this occur in the workplace and how can we respond in the workplace. So that's what I'll be talking about a little bit later today. But pretty much for me, everything involves diversity, equity, and inclusion. How can we make our spaces not only safer, but more welcoming and more inclusive, whether it's things like safe zone training for our LGBTQ plus community, whether it's having conversations about racial equity, whether it's talking about anti-oppression in all of its forms. This is the work that I do in my everyday life and the lens that I bring to everything that I do. So thank you.
Great, thank you both so much for that background. Now that we know a little bit more about our speakers, we want to kick off our discussion around bystander intervention with a quick poll, which all participants should see pop up. So you have a choice of yes or no, and if you feel comfortable doing so, please share in the chat reasons why you did or did not intervene in the situation. So the question is, have you ever witnessed harassment but didn't speak up? All right, so it looks like 84% of people who answered said yes, that they have witnessed harassment but didn't speak up, and 16% said no. So some of the responses I'm seeing in the chat are, for me, it was fear of confrontation, some intimidation, not feeling like you could make a difference, fear of it turning into an unsafe situation. Let's see. Yeah, just a lot of fear. in a lot of different ways. Afraid to meddle in people's business. That's a great one, Leah. And specifically in the workplace, power dynamics. So a lot of different reasons, but I think we can kind of pull a main maybe theme from that as being fear.
And I can say that that is incredibly common. Basically, any reason that any of you have given for not speaking up, that reason is valid, right? It's true for you. That's valid. It's okay. I get it. Like, we've all been there. But luckily, through bystander intervention, there's always going to be a way to intervene and help the person that's being targeted that that works with whatever your hesitations are, whatever your identities are, whatever your fears are.
So Shauna, could you tell us more about why some of these type of responses in the chat happen, about why we see it and what kinds of strategies are helpful in addressing harassment? And then Cherie, if you have anything to add following Shauna's comments, please do so.
I think something that's kind of common in our society, or some sections of our society, is this individualism to a fault, right? Leave everyone alone. It's not your business. Just go on with your life. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing. And sometimes that works for us, but sometimes that means that we accidentally ignore people that are in trouble, right? And so when the person who's being targeted for identity-based harassment, like, unfortunately, they're not actually in the best position always to stop it. If someone's willing to harass you for being who you are, they're not going to listen to you when you say, please don't. They're going to listen to everybody else. They're going to listen to the crowd. They're going to listen to someone that looks like them. And so it really is best if everybody else who's around, all the bystanders, speak up or say something or do something instead. So not wanting to get involved, that's a normal thing in our society. Not wanting to have the harassment turn on you, that's a normal part of being discriminated against yourself. Like, these are all valid feelings. And the power, I saw something about the power dynamics at work. Yeah, you don't want to make your situation worse. We're certainly all worried about our own safety, financially, physically. But again, there's a way to overcome any of those hesitations.
Right. And I was going to say what came to mind for me, and I just had to Google it to find out when it was, but I remember being a child or a teen in the 70s and 80s. And there was the story of the woman in New York City, you might recall this, who was stabbed, and stabbed, killed, raped. And only one person called the police. They said there were 38 people who had the opportunity, bystanders, people who walked by, people who observed. And I don't know if it is that someone thought someone else would do something, like, oh, that doesn't involve me. Why should I do it? That's someone else's responsibility, but not recognizing that the power of one person. What it reminds me of is, you might have heard the story of, there is a person walking along a beach and there are starfish washed up, and that person's picking up starfish and tossing them back in the ocean, picking up starfish, tossing them back in the ocean. Someone walks up and says, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. Look at all these starfish. You can't possibly make a difference here. As the person picks up the starfish, tosses it in the ocean, they say, it made a difference for that one. The power of one person, an individual. So just one person speaking up in that instance really can go a long way. And in some instances, this is a life or death situation. So
you are totally right, Cherie. And that thing you're talking about is called the bystander apathy effect. And it just means that when people are witnessing an incident, everyone thinks that everyone else will do something, so they don't do it themselves. But it takes that one person to change the energy almost. And if one person steps up and does something, it makes it easier for everybody else to do it too. So let's look at that next slide and talk about how we do that, right?
John, I think we have another poll prior to that.
All right, so we do have one more question, and then Shauna, we'll go ahead and talk about those 5 Ds, which are really important. And I know it's really helpful in that context to kind of simplify what we can do. But the second poll we have is, what do you think the most common form of harassment is? Great. So most people picked verbal, which I think there is some overlap in a couple of these categories. I picked verbal. I'm not sure what the right answer is, if there even is a right answer with all of the overlap, but Shauna, I would love to kick it to you to talk about the 5 Ds here. And then Cherie, I'll have some, I guess, follow-up questions for you to that poll.
Yeah, as far as I know, all the research does point to verbal being the most common form of harassment. It's easy, it's quick. You can do it almost anywhere. It does happen the most often, and I can't wait to hear Cherie talk about how verbal harassment really props up all other kinds of forms of harassment and violence. But yeah, can we dig into that next slide? Yes. Okay. So we all want to know what we can actually do if we witness harassment. And that first poll that said that it said 16% of people that witness harassment spoke up every time. I would almost challenge you to, I would be curious to know if maybe you did witness harassment, but just didn't recognize it. I think we've all seen harassment and maybe didn't pick up on it because it's maybe not something that we personally experience or have a lot of experience with. And so the first thing that we're going to do before we get into the 5 Ds is really just learn to observe what's going on around us. And we want to look for people that look uncomfortable, right? If we see an interaction, we see someone that looks uncomfortable, they're shifting their eyes, they're making themselves small, then we want to do one of these 5 Ds, even if we're not quite sure what's going on, because that way we can make sure that everything's fine instead of just letting an incident go and hoping for the best, hope that lady's okay. We can't do that anymore, because as we're hearing on the news today, there is violence and harassment happening against marginalized people all the time, all over our country to different degrees. And we cannot afford anymore to let any instance of harassment or violence slip by and go unchecked. And so here's what we're going to do if we want to check that. The good thing is that none of these things have to be this big grand gesture. And I'm going to go through them quickly because I know we don't have that much time. So direct, these are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. Get ready. Direct. It's just like it sounds. You say, hey, knock it off. Hey, that's racist. You can't say that here. That's against our policies. Can you stop? Can you leave them alone? Whatever. Just say the thing and be done with it. It's not a debate with the person that's engaging in this harmful behavior. All you want to do is just say, nope, not while I'm around, and then move on. Delayed, that's what you do if the incident was either over really quickly or you're too far away, you couldn't get to them in time. It really just means you check in with the person. You just ask, hey, are you okay? And the reason why this one, if you're going to do any of these, at least do this one, because research shows that when people that have experienced harassment, if they are given even a knowing glance from a bystander, the trauma around that incident is reduced by half. So when we just acknowledge, hey, you just went through something, it looked kind of tough. When we just acknowledge that, we reduce people's trauma by half. And trauma, and this is the psychological term trauma, not the online social media version of trauma, it builds up and it stays with us. And so if we can make it so that people have less to begin with by just saying, hey, are you okay? Then that does not take very much effort on our part, and it makes us super powerful as bystanders. It's amazing. So that's the least we should do. Distract, pretty simple. It just means you put the attention on you, or you distract someone, you accidentally spill your coffee on purpose, you ask, when's this bus coming? It's always late, isn't it? Oh, I like your shirt, whatever. And you can distract either the person harassing or the target, get their mind off it, make small talk. Oh, the weather, it's up and down these days, isn't it? Whatever, just put the focus on you, take it away from these two people. And just, the point is to interrupt that moment and give everybody a chance to maybe even just walk away. Delegate. This is what I love about bystander intervention. It's so simple. Even if you feel like you're not the right person to get involved for whatever reason, your safety level, you don't have time, maybe you look exactly like the person that's harassing and you don't know if you'll be well received by trying to support the victim, whatever the reason, you can just ask someone else to help. And then you're still a good bystander. Like, how awesome is that? So you can ask the security guard, the bus driver, someone that's like taller and bigger than you, because I'm too small and can't always help everyone myself, just get someone else and say, hey, this situation doesn't look right. Can you check it out? Can you take a look? And especially if that's a person's job, they're going to be happy that you gave them that heads up. And then lastly, we have document. And I put it last because if all you're doing is taking out your phone and documenting someone's harassment, you're not necessarily helping them in that moment. So if you can, do one of the other Ds. But if they're being taken care of and you think the situation warrants it, get your camera phone out, start filming. The tips are to talk about where you are, when you are, what just happened before you hit record, and then just let it roll. And then the second tip is to never post it without the victim's permission. You could re-traumatize them. It's for them. It's not for you. It's not for entertainment. It's for them if they feel like they want to use it. And then, of course, when it comes to police violence, while I'm not an expert on that, and that would be a whole other webinar, the ACLU has incredible resources and tells you exactly what to do when it comes to documenting police interactions with citizens, but especially Black and Brown citizens, to keep them safe and to keep you safe. But you do have a right to record the police when they're out in public. So that's the 5 Ds. So you don't have to have a big personality like me and be ready to say, hey, knock it off. You can just ask someone else to help. You can distract. You can sing a Christmas carol really loud so everyone looks at you, whatever. But there's always going to be a way to help, no matter what situation you're in.
Thank you so much, Shauna. That's very helpful and easy to remember. I know I'll be able to remember that. So I appreciate it. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions specifically about the 5 Ds or anything that Shauna just mentioned, hold on to those questions and we'll make sure to answer those at the end. Next, Cherie, could you share more about verbal harassment and microaggressions in the workplace specifically? And what do we do if someone is experiencing harassment or violence but doesn't wish to report or do something about the event?
Great. Yeah, I will. And before we do that, I have some slides on that. But I also wanted to backtrack a little bit and say, I feel as if I was remiss in not acknowledging what occurred yesterday in Atlanta, the loss of life of the 8 Asian American individuals. And because we have seen, the FBI has reported there has been an increase in hate crimes against racial and ethnic groups, LGBT groups, especially our transgender women of color across the country. These numbers have been increasing over the last 5 years. And I almost see that as our Charleston 9 against the Black or African American community, our Pulse, Orlando, whether it's the mosque in Minnesota. These events are happening so frequently. And so I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. Regarding microaggressions in the workplace. So yeah, these are those things that make us say, ouch. So next slide, please. So I just kind of want to walk you through these a little bit. So basically, microaggressions are a term that were coined back in 1970 by Dr. Chester Pierce, who was a Harvard psychiatrist. And he actually initially was talking about racial microaggressions that people experience. If you get a chance, and maybe when we're in a break, I'll put it in the chat box. There's a great video clip that I use in my trainings called The Look. It's something that Procter & Gamble put out. It's what is it like navigating the world, being a member of a racial or ethnic group, and the looks that people get. It can apply to a lot of settings. Like you're looking at someone, oh, that person has too many piercings, tattoos, look at that hair color, look at that person's weight. What gender is that person? Just those looks we're not aware of that we give people and the messages that it's sending. Now, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Dr. Gerald Wing Su, a psychologist at Columbia University, he ran with the whole idea of microaggressions, and he was looking at how it applied to marginalized groups. So these are comments, they're behaviors, they're cues. but oftentimes what they're giving off is like some kind of hostile, derogatory, or an unwelcoming message. I will say that members of marginalized or underrepresented groups experience them more often than the others, but I'm going to be honest, every single one of us has committed, witnessed, as well as experienced microaggressions. And I'm going to go through some in a minute. Now, I will say though, sometimes these are met as compliments. And when you see this next slide, you'll be like, oh yes, I've heard this as a compliment, but it really isn't a compliment. It can have a really negative impact on the target, but they're often informed by learned stereotypes that people have, as well as biases. So next slide. So maybe go ahead one more slide. Let's see. Yes, go ahead. And then what I want to do is before we hit play, I think this is a great example of how microaggressions work, right? Every single one of us is bitten by mosquito bites, but guess what? Some people get bitten more often than others. So as you watch this video clip, I'm really interested in hearing whether you identify with any of the items that are listed here. So go ahead. Thank you.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice.
bad
I
now.
love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
So pretty. Can
Can I touch it, please? Can I please?
is annoying. That makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Great, thank you. So just by a quick show of hands, you can do it by, raising your hand or using any of the reactions. How many people can identify with anything that was listed in there? I'm sure many of us can, right? Great, thank you. Seeing lots of, yes, thank you so much. So next slide, please. So I'm sure every single one of us has been asked that question, where are you from, right? And I know we as human beings are curious, right? But just think about it. Do you need to know that information in this setting, right? Is it pertinent or relevant to what you're doing? And here's the issue, is that we should all be proud of our own heritage, our background, all of that. But here's where this becomes a problem, is when someone answers where they're from, they say, hey, I'm from Baltimore. Someone looks at you and they're like looking at your physical characteristics. Oh, you're not really from Baltimore. Where are you really from? Or where were you born? Or, and this, by the way, is meant as a compliment. Oh, your English is so good. And you're looking at them kind of side-eyed, like, what is wrong with you? And why would you say something like that? That's absolutely ridiculous. Basically, the message it's sending is you're not American, you're not from around here, perhaps you're not welcome, we don't like people like you around here. It's a very negative message that's being sent. What we also need to acknowledge is that, yes, while some people are comfortable answering these kinds of questions, there are people who actually get asked this question all the time, multiple times a day, and it gets totally annoying. Now, this next one, I will say from a biological perspective, there's only one race, the human race. Guess what? Yes, we as human beings are 99 point many trailing nines alike. There's no human subspecies. But when people say stuff like this, oh, but I didn't notice you were black, or, oh, I don't see color. I will tell you, many well-intentioned people say that. It's a lie. I'm sorry, it is. Because children notice color. It is not the act of noticing and acknowledging one's color that is bad. It's what you do with that information. If I treat you differently because of the color of your skin, your perceived gender identity, your sexual orientation, the fact that I'm now 50 wearing reading glasses and you think I'm over the hill and I have nothing to contribute, that's what becomes wrong. And when we say things like that, that's where we're denying someone's experience navigating the world based upon those sociocultural characteristics. This next one is definitely meant as a compliment. Oh, but you're so articulate. You speak so well. And I'm sure there are people on here who are raising hands who have heard this, right? And you're looking at them like, why would you expect otherwise? You know, that's the message it's sending. It's not a compliment. And I will tell you, as a big sports buff, I grew up watching sports with my mom and my dad. I'm a sports mom, a hockey, lacrosse, and a soccer mom. If you watch sports, notice the use of language. Yes. Basically, for Black athletes, it's much more on physical and athletic prowess. And for white athletes, it's, oh, that person has a great head for the game. Look at their IQ for the game, right? Almost think back to eugenics. Look at the difference in language. I'm going to tell you, in my 50 years, I have never heard a white athlete referred to as articulate because that's the expectation. But next time, count how many times a Black athlete is referred to as articulate. You know, it's really annoying. This next one, last one is, if you're a person of color standing in line, say at a customer service counter, and you're next in line and the person totally overlooks you and you say something, right? Hey, I was next. Oh, I didn't see you. You're like, but I'm not invisible, right? This also plays out. How many people have had that experience of you walk up to, people aren't queued up properly. They're not like in a single line, but there are clumps of people. There's always that one privileged person who cuts the line, right? They think they're first and they cut in front of everyone. When I approach those lines, I ask, hey, are you in line? You're not? Okay. And then I go in front of that person, but I don't just step in front of people. And basically the message it's sending is you don't belong, you're not as worthy of service. And thank you, Leah. But here's the big thing is that whole intention versus impact is huge. People will say, oh, but I didn't mean any harm. Or they'll engage in micro-validation saying, oh, well, you're just being too sensitive, or they're just words, or you're being PC, or you're a snowflake. Think of all this. You're playing the whatever card. No, I can never tell someone how they're supposed to feel, right? I can only basically acknowledge what I did. So next slide. So now here's the issue though. When microaggressions come up, it's in the workplace or wherever, oftentimes we're left with our mouths open and we don't have a response or a comeback for that. So as I said before, we all have committed, perhaps unknowingly, microaggressions. We witness them and we receive them. So what do we do about them? So if you actually committed a microaggression, you did something inappropriate, like patting someone on the head. Oh, I like your hair. Let me feel it. Don't do it, by the way. I'm just saying that. Just don't. People are not zoo animals. They're not pets. Don't do it, please. But if you recognize it in the moment, apologize and say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was inappropriate. Or if you don't recognize it till later, apologize then. But it is so important to engage in an authentic apology, not the non-apology, which is, well, I'm sorry if you felt offended by what I said. That is not an apology. I'm sorry. What you can say though is, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to touch your hair. Now, what happens when someone points it out to you saying, hey, that was inappropriate behavior. We don't use that kind of language. That was really disrespectful. What happens in those instances is, as human nature is, we get super defensive and we'll put it back on that person. What we need to do is recognize and own it and apologize. Next slide, please. Okay, great. Now, if you witness a microaggression, you can do things like saying, ouch, right? That'll stop that person, hopefully, from saying or doing what they're doing. Or you can name the offense. And what I mean by that is saying to that person, did you really mean to say that? Or help me understand what you meant by that comment. Or can you see how that could be taken the wrong way? Now, you can choose to support the target publicly or in private, but I'm going to tell you, public goes a much longer way than those private sidebar conversations. Has anyone in the workplace ever been in a meeting that got a bit heated? And maybe you were the target of the heat, probably all of us, right? Now, what happens 99% of the time is no one speaks up. But what does happen is you'll get those emails after the fact or those sidebar conversations like, oh, I can't believe so-and-so did that. Are you okay? I hope everything's okay. Think of how much more powerful it would have been if any of those people had spoken up during the meeting, right? Yes, Shauna, you're absolutely right. It's too little, too late. Someone speaking up during that meeting could have changed the entire tone of the meeting and stopped that behavior. You can choose to support someone else who is speaking up. And I mean that as silence is complicity. If no one speaks up, the people engaging in that behavior are going to think it's fine, right? You can choose to talk to the offender in private later on. But one thing we want people to remember too is amplifying ideas or suggestions that are ignored. And what I mean by that is we know from studies that younger people, women, and persons of color oftentimes will put forward an idea in a meeting, right? And they're ignored and someone else gets credit. Think about it this way. How many times have you ever put forth an idea? Crickets, right? No one says anything. A few minutes later, one of your own colleagues takes your idea, runs with it. Oh, that's fantastic, so-and-so, let's do it. And you're like, I just said that a few minutes ago. What's going on here? We're telling people to say, you know what, so-and-so, that was a great idea. But you know what, so-and-so, you said this first. Let's find out more about what you had to say about the situation. Absolutely. Shauna, she is spot on, right? Bystander apathy, right? You have to be the first person to say something, or if someone says something first, support them. And also too, I like this, Patty was saying, speaking up during a meeting to support a coworker is a very important leadership skill. And yes, Leah, you're absolutely right. People who make jokes. Oh, I was only joking, you know, and then, yeah, I love how you do this, flip it back on them. So what was funny about that? How about if I told a joke about such and such, something that relates to them? How would you feel? And then sometimes that can get them to think differently. Absolutely. Now, the other thing is what happens when we receive a microaggression? This came up actually in your very first poll when people said why they didn't feel comfortable responding. You can choose to speak up or not, but we totally acknowledge there are power differentials. If it's my boss, I can tell you, I'm probably not going to speak up. Now, I have a really good relationship with my boss, so I would speak up. But many people are afraid of, oh my gosh, retaliation. My next performance evaluation is going to be terrible. They're not going to give me the same networking opportunities, so you don't speak up. But that's why, if it occurs in mixed company, we really need people to be allies, right? Actually be part of being a part of the bystander intervention. But I will tell you, if it's really bad, like discrimination or harassment, people most likely will file a complaint. And then lastly, people may choose to seek out a community of support, asking others, peers, hey, how did you handle this situation? How did you navigate this? What did you do for self-care? So that's pretty much all I have to share on that topic. And I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was extremely helpful, Cherie. I really appreciate it. And all of the slides and the video was great. Definitely helped put things into perspective in a context that I think everyone can understand. So lastly, we really wanted to open up the conversation around, what do you see as the future of specific work to dismantle some of this harassment, particularly around microaggressions and racial harassment? And how can organizations, volunteer groups, and social communities promote a culture of saying something when they see something?
Right. So I'm going to be honest, you know, that saying, say something, if you see something, say something. We saw it all on public transportation and things like that. So I'm going to say, I honestly don't like that saying, and I'll tell you why. Because what it reminds me of, remember the last couple of years, we've had people having the police called upon them. That's a form of violence too. You know, I don't think you belong in this area. You're reading a book in a car. Oh, you must be up to no good. Oh, you're the UPS driver. They're there to steal packages, but you're there for your job, right? So I always say in my sessions, do we call on all people equally? We don't, right? But what I do want people to come away from this with is it all behooves us to speak up when someone's being harassed, when someone's being verbally attacked, when someone's safety is at question, basically because we can't create a more welcoming and inclusive environment as well as welcoming and inclusive society without it. And I also too always try to put myself in the shoes of other people, practicing empathy, meaning how would I feel if I were the person in that situation? And that's something that spurs me to speak up as well. And I will say, and Shauna, she was very, open at the very beginning and transparent. I will tell you, as half of an interracial couple, I've had that verbal harassment. You're walking down the street, you're like, oh my gosh, who are you with? Why are you with that person? Blah, 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 blah. Sometimes I have a comeback, sometimes I don't. But having been on the receiving end, I probably feel more comfortable speaking up. Now, I don't speak up in every single circumstance. And like I had put at the beginning, sometimes it's a safety issue. But I think the more we can practice these skills, the more you do it, the more comfortable you will become. All it needs to do, I think after you get past the first couple, and I see Shauna nodding her head, it becomes second nature. I think it's that fear, though, that so many of us put in the chat box at the beginning that keeps our hands held, that we can't say something. And I will say, it's like a car accident happens, and instead of someone calling 911, like this person's injured, what do? This is where you're talking about document, right? Well, I'll just get it on my phone. That's not helping that person who's injured in the car. what does that person need at that moment, right? So they can be safe. Yes, great. Now I see a couple of questions in the chat box. Could I respond to those, Heidi, at all? Because there was one. Okay, so I'm gonna scroll up real quick. Let me see. Okay, so yes, Leah had a great comment. Hers was, what can we share about being a good digital bystander, seeing harassment or inappropriate things on social media and feeling comfortable combating them? Shauna, I'm going to punt that one to you first, because I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, and then I'll tag on to that one, and then I'll address Ashley's question.
Yeah, I love it. So first, there's a great organization called Heart Mob. So Google Heart Mob. They have a ton of tips, a ton of ways to get resources if you're the one being harassed, a ton of ways to help other people if you want more information. But generally, there's just kind of some best practices out there. If you see anything that shouldn't be on social media that's harmful or offensive, go ahead, report and block. If you're concerned about getting, if you're being trolled, if you're being harassed consistently, that's where document comes into play. You want to screenshot everything, you want to keep records, write everything down. You don't have to look at it. You can even get you can delegate and get a friend to do it for you if it's too much. But just keep track of everything just in case. Now, if you are witnessing it, I often think about this idea that we often cannot convince the person that's harassing and trolling online to change like that, right? And that's fine. But what we can do is we can make it so that everyone else who's watching this thread knows that that person is the outlier, that that's not okay behavior, and no one else agrees with them, right? So we want to say, dude, you're wrong, or that's not what we're doing here, or that's not okay. Knowing that we're not going to convince that one person in that one moment, but we want to show everybody else that we support them if they aren't comfortable speaking up for themselves. And another tactic is just, you can flood someone's feed with cute puppy pictures, just put a bunch of positivity in their feed so they don't have to see the negative stuff. That's just a couple things, but Heart Mob can help with more even.
Shauna, I think that was great. I was going to say some little simple things I do. So one thing I see on social media a lot is, especially when it comes to transgender individuals, misnaming and misgendering and using the wrong pronouns purposefully, right? So if someone's like using the wrong pronoun, I'll just type in the correct pronoun, leave it at that. And usually if one person responds, several other people will go on and respond. I do agree with Shauna, though, is that sometimes it's not worth losing brain cells, frankly, arguing with people, debating, because you can't get those brain cells back, nor that time or energy. However, you can report things, but I'll say, I don't know what Shauna's experience has been. Like on Facebook, I've reported some things that were just horrible, and the Facebook algorithms did not find that it was horrible. And I'll give you the example. This was someone who I grew up with. I went to high school with his sister, so he was a couple of years older than I was. This was a couple of years ago when President Obama was still president. And it was right after in Dallas, there was a police shooting, and it was the Black veteran who was then blown up by the robotic thing that went in, right? And so President Obama was flying down there to offer his condolences. And this person posted on Facebook, "Here's hoping President Obama's trip to Dallas is as successful as JFK's." If that is not a threat, if not a death threat, right? Highly offensive. So I reported it to Facebook. It came back, "This does not go against our community standards guidelines." So I will tell you, I unfriended that person, because that's an act of violence, me having to see it. Yes, you can unfollow, whatever, but that's just completely inappropriate. So in that instance, that's what I did. So I hope that was helpful. Now, there was a question from Ashley. Hi, Ashley. Ashley had asked about safe zone training. So depending on where you are, I'm not sure. So a lot of universities have safe zone training. So at Johns Hopkins University on the Homewood campus, there's a whole LGBTQ life, Office of LGBTQ plus life, and they offer safe zone training very regularly. So you might want to check to see whether your entity has it, or whether you could tag on, and I'd be more than willing to follow up with you afterwards. But what I did also put in the chat box was that this is publicly available training. And so on their website, thesafezoneproject.com, you can download all of their materials, and you can use that even to implement safe zone training in your own area, because we're, especially our LGBTQ plus communities, and I'm being intersectional here too, because even within that community, there's a huge amount of diversity, racial, ethnic, able-bodiedness, socioeconomic status, you name it, right? But how you can be an ally to that community. So Ashley, I hope that was helpful.
And I see Noah's comment about repeat offenders who are consistently dismissive. So I would say first thing is to document. Have a record on paper of the date, the time, what they said, who was there, who witnessed it, how it felt, any detail you can get, because sometimes not only the person who's doing it, but also people in authority that actually are in a position to say, no, really, knock it off. They might not respond unless they see that there's a pattern. And so sometimes we have to prove that there is a pattern. And so that's where documentation comes in. If you're wanting to have a conversation with this person, I'm thinking specifically about like maybe old friends from my past or family members, you know, where I just don't have they're just not as progressive as I ended up being, right? And if I get around the dinner table with them or whatever, I want to maintain a relationship with them. And so every instance of a microaggression can't be a huge blowout event, right? It's actually more beneficial in the long run if I stick with them and our relationship and just offer a little bit of resistance every single time. If I can consistently push back and say, nope, that's actually not true. Anyways, pass the biscuits, right? Like, just let it be known, nope, we're not okay with what you're saying. No, not everyone agrees with you. And I'm gonna resist you every time you say something. So if you're getting annoyed, maybe you should stop, right? Like, that's actually gonna do better to curb their behavior, and eventually make them stop, hopefully. But if it's a workplace thing and you're not really friends, you just are stuck with them, I would say start documenting as soon as you can, bring it to the right person that is going to be helpful, and then delegate, get your allies. That a wonderful list that Cherie had of like, here's what you can do if you're experiencing microaggressions. I was seeing delegate in there. I was seeing be direct. It's all under those 5 Ds. So just do what you can to help, whether it's you or someone else.
Great. No, I agree with that, Shauna. And actually, Ashley, I love what you wrote in the chat box. So her question was, would you agree that cultural humility plays a huge role in eliminating unconscious harassment? And if so, how do you approach that conversation with someone without offending them? So here's something I always find interesting. Why is it that we're worried about offending or making the person feel bad who's engaging in harassment? I'm going to be honest, right? We need to shut down that behavior. So it does, you know, but everyone's like, oh, well, I don't want to make that person feel bad. Well, they just made a whole room full of people feel bad, you know? And as Noah was just saying, oftentimes they're repeat offenders, right? They're that person, you're like, oh my gosh, don't let so-and-so speak during this meeting. We don't know what's going to come out of their mouths, right? We all know people like this, you know? And so sometimes—
You know what I love, Cherie? You know, I love the phrase, it's okay to make someone feel uncomfortable for making you feel uncomfortable.
I agree. That's a great way of saying it. Absolutely. And that's what we need to do more of, right? Not just, oh my gosh, it's so-and-so, you know, oh, well, you know, that person's just of a certain generation. Guess what? Even people of a certain generation can learn different vocabulary, different behavior. You know, I like to use this quote from the late Maya Angelou that says, you know, well, I just butchered it, but, you know, do better until you know better, right? And when you know better, you've got to do better. So basically, I think that's just so important for us to do, is that don't be afraid to make people— I loved it how you said it, Shauna. Don't be afraid to make people feel uncomfortable when they've made you uncomfortable or others uncomfortable. That goes a very, very long way. Oh, yes. I like this. If you can learn to use a smartphone, you can stop saying slurs. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And so, yes, and this goes back to both Noah's point as well, is this whole, when you're telling people that we're using different language and that was appropriate, how many people have heard, oh, you're trying to be the PC police, you know, everyone's being fragile, I should be able to say whatever I want to say. Guess what? You don't have a right to say anything that you want to say, or you can't say anything you want to say, but just recognize there are going to be consequences for saying whatever you want to say. So one that I get in with people a lot, And it's not a losing battle. I just keep reminding them, yes, is that no, we don't use the R word anymore. I'm not going to use any of these slurs, or that's so G, or this or that or whatever. And people are like, oh, it's no big deal. I didn't mean it like that. I don't care how you meant it. And Leah, that goes back to what you were saying. Your intentions might have been good, but there's a harmful impact on the people who have to hear that. So I think recognizing that. So let's see. Oh, good. I see some more other questions. This is a great one. Heidi talked about how can we talk to children about bystander intervention? I think if this type of training happens earlier, we will be more comfortable in our adult lives or careers. Wholeheartedly agree. And that's where a lot of this bullying behavior comes from, right? So I think really, even without training, saying, if you hear one of your classmates, your teammates, or whatever doing or saying something inappropriate, if that would hurt your feelings, or if that would hurt you, speak up and say something. Something as simple as like what you said, Shauna, knock it off. Hey, that's not nice. Would you say that in front of your parents? What would your parents think about that? What would your coach think of that? Whatever, right? That might get the kids to stop saying and doing some of those behaviors. But I do agree that unfortunately, and sadly, kids sometimes learn this from we adults. And they're just modeling the behavior they see from us, which is not good behavior. So.
But I think the conversation around bullying has changed so much since I was in school. And so I feel actually pretty lucky, or I'm glad that kids today, at least, like, everybody kind of knows that bullying's bad, right? It still happens, but it's more accepted that, like, bullying's not okay. Well, harassment is just bullying based on who you are, right? Something you can't change. So I think a lot of times kids are too afraid to be direct and speak up. And so to give them the tools and like here's a phrase that will work in almost any situation, so they don't have to think about it or stress out about it. Just, I'm obviously of a certain kind of crowd, but I would say, dude, that's not cool. And I think if you just say, dude, that's not cool, every single time something is said, then that one phrase can change the whole vibe of a group of young boys, for example. If they know, like, oh, so we don't all have to be sexist together, that's awesome, because I really didn't feel like it. But this one kid keeps trying to make us all sexist, and I'm going along with it because I don't know any better. So just have one kid say, dude, it's not cool. Or this is when we do the delayed method, where we can at least check in and say, like, hey, are you okay? And what would you like me to do next time? Like, we can ask our friends. I see this comment here from Chip. I read the whole thing. I'm so excited that you want to help your son be a better bystander when it comes to trans harassment. So maybe the right thing to do is for them to ask that trans friend, like, what should I do the next time? How can I help you? Because maybe the trans friend is like, just stand next to me, or you don't have to say anything, or can you go tell the teacher? Like especially if there's a relationship there, like, check in with them and see what they want, so that they have the agency and they can make the choice.
Absolutely. And Chip, to your point, I think just letting that individual know, especially with the two really good friends who are transgender, basically letting them know that they're not alone. I mean, I think that's so important. And I have to laugh, Leah, you put in boomers. My daughter calls me a boomer. I'm 50. I'm not a boomer. My parents are boomers. They're in their 70s. I am not a boomer, but I know any older person, and I'm not an older person. I'm a middle-aged person, but I had to say that and put that out there. However, I will tell you that Shauna's right. This whole concept of bullying, though, again, remember, I mentioned I grew up in the 70s and 80s. We didn't even have the word bullying back then. We didn't call it that. You just took your lumps and you went about your day. No one would have helped you. It's like, oh, you got your butt kicked at school today. Oh, well, happens. I dealt with it. And that was it. And for many years, people just simply deal with it. What was the thing? Oh, well, boys will be boys. Girls will be girls. This is acceptable behavior. Just deal with it. And no one would address it. So I appreciate you, Shauna, lifting that up. That is just so important. But I also, too, remember the days where kids were treated differently because of who their parents were. I mean, I'm dating myself, but my daughter, like I said, is a senior. When she was in kindergarten, she had two classmates who had two mommies, right? And the kids were not nice. And so I would ask my daughter, I was like, okay, are you friends with these kids? Do you speak up? Are you being kind? And I think it was Leah, you might have said that, right? Asking your own kids, are you being kind? What did you do? What did you do in that situation? Because I think that goes a long way in allyship as well. And I like this too. What would you want something to say to you that would model that role reversal? It's that putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. We did have a question. I don't know, Shauna, if you're aware of this. Any books about being a good ally? Did I see that in here somewhere?
Not necessarily for children, but yes.
Oh, and Leah, you don't have to apologize. No, no, no. I just laughed. It made me laugh. It wasn't inappropriate. I just cracked up about that. So you're good. Go ahead. So yes, definitely get Shauna's book. Get Shauna's book. I think that's awesome. Let's see. I'm trying to see what else is in here. Yeah, bruh, that's not cool. Yeah, I'm a bruh too. My daughter calls me. I was like, what? No, I'm not. I'm not one of your friends, but that's hilarious. But let's see. Okay,
I think this last comment from Arthur.
Yes, I'm scrolling and looking at this. Okay, let me read this real quick. Okay, so in regards to unconscious bias or harassment and microaggressions that are not meant to be hurtful, is there a way to firmly tell folks their words are unacceptable, but also to acknowledge that even being a good ally is a learning process with an end of deepening the relationship through the experience? Shauna, you want to take that first and then I'll...
Yeah, I think, yes, calling in versus calling out. Perfect. So there is an organization that has a local chapter here in Baltimore called Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice.
Yep.
And they have some really great resources and some great trainings that go on from time to time. And one really impacted me that was just talking about how do we convince our family to not be racist at Thanksgiving? That's basically what the webinar was, right? But it had a couple tactics of moving people over to your side in a productive way. Because if we are just fighting people or escalating the aggression or putting people on the defensive, no matter how right you might be, they're not going to hear a word you say. So what's your goal in these situations? Do you want to be right? Or do you want to move this person over to your side? You can't have both. And so if you want to move this person over to your side, we got to stay calm, number one. We have to talk about the behavior, the specific action, not blame the person, not say you're transphobic, you're racist. We have to say, so this comment is considered racist, be really patient. And another good thing I think is to personalize something. If you can say, if it's someone that you care about or have a relationship with in some way, you can say, so, hey, I have a lot of really close trans friends, and it really hurts my feelings when people talk this way about them. And, they're struggling sometimes with XYZ, and I want to support them. And this word really goes a long way to keep the violence up against them. Like, do you mind not saying that anymore? Right. And that, like, it's really hard to argue. Basically, the idea is it's really hard to argue with your personal experience. They can't say, no, you don't have friends. You don't know that. That doesn't offend you. They can't say that. So if you can make it about you and personalize it, that can really help. And there's more tips like that on the Surge website, I believe.
Absolutely. And Shauna, to that point too, is getting people to decenter it from themselves. So, well, I didn't mean any harm at that intent piece. And you can say, hey, you know what? I know you didn't mean any harm, but you know how hurtful that is to someone to hear that. Or sometimes I'll share, hey, you know what? I've made mistakes too. And especially because this is the work I do on a daily basis, I'll share a quick one is that if you Google me, I do all kinds of unconscious bias trainings. I did my first one way back in 2008, feels like a lifetime ago, honestly, but you will see that some of my previous titles were unconscious bias, uncovering our blind spots. Seems fine, right? Nothing wrong with that? Well, I will tell you, it's been 4 or 5 years ago. I was doing a webinar for a state health department, and someone from the disability community reached out to me and said, hey, are you aware that the term blind spot is an ableist term and it's very hurtful to many people in the disability community? So here I'm trying to model the behavior I expect of other people. I didn't get defensive. And I wrote back, I go, thank you for bringing this to my attention. No, I was not aware of this. I changed the title of the webinar. At the beginning of the webinar, explained why I changed the title of the webinar. And I try to, when people use the word blind spot, explain this, but I'm not always successful. But just getting people to understand that you're going to make mistakes, right? Simply because you don't know and that wasn't your intention. But when you make that mistake, remember, we got to do better, right? So that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah,
So,
if we
yeah.
can get rid of the stress that comes with like, oh no, sometimes I'll mess up. It's like, just accept it. It's a lifelong journey. We just always work to do better. And once I fully accepted that, the weight on my shoulders just lifted. You just do your best. And when someone provides you with new information, you take it in. And that's all we can do. None of us are perfect. We all have a lot to unlearn.
Absolutely.
Kind of in the purview of speaking about disabilities, and my colleague and friend here, Chris Norline, who put a question in, would you agree the inclusion movement for students with disabilities over the last 20 years helped to reduce bullying and then created more advocates and promoted inclusion in other communities, workforce, social groups, etc., as those students are becoming adults? I just wanted to piggyback on some questions around disabilities.
I don't know. I don't know if I can speak definitively to that, because I almost feel like there's more bullying rather than less bullying, because I have kids who are in school still, and it's pretty much any kid who's different, you get picked on for something, and it's just, I think people are more aware. Yes. Has it translated necessarily into action to be more inclusive? Not sure. This is some of the work I do in my daily lives, how to make our events even more inclusive, right? So I don't know if I can definitively answer that, but after we do answer this, I did want to get back to one of Chidi Abele's questions too, because I think we skipped over it. So Shauna, what do you think? Do you think that in the past 20 years, because of the awareness and in the more mainstreaming of, students with disabilities into classrooms, that there's been a reduction, or? No?
Well, I would say anecdotally, I agree that it seems like it's related to the disability movement, disability rights. I think disability activism is really badass, and some amazing things have happened in that sphere that we can all learn from as far as disrupting discrimination. But I think every day we're still trying to say, like, when you snap a girl's bra when you're 11 years old, that's bullying against girls. Like, we're having to show all the other isms are also bullying, and that it's all bad, and that we really should just be accepting everybody for who they are and leaving them alone.
Absolutely. Right. So, Chidi Abele's question was, what advice would you give to folks who have trouble navigating when to speak up on behalf of someone being harassed because they've had the script flipped on them in the past? Shauna, I'll let you answer that one first, and then I'll.
Yeah, so maybe that's when you don't be direct, right? Maybe that's when you delegate to somebody else, say, hey, next time they do that, can you say something? I don't feel comfortable. Even if you're not the recipient, right? You can also do the delayed method and just check in with that person affected and say, what would you like me to do or say next time that happens? I'm really sorry. I just couldn't bring myself to do it because I get harassed too. Like, they're going to understand. They're going to understand that. Or just, again, distract, make a fool of yourself, have fun, drop a book real loud, just interrupt that moment so that it can pass and people can get on with the meeting or whatever else is going on.
Right. And I also wonder if this is coming from, like, if you're bringing up that someone's behavior is inappropriate. So think about if someone even mentioned the word race, oh, you're racist for talking about race. It's like, no, that's not racist for bringing, so I don't know if that's what you're getting at, how people get defensive and they want to turn it back on you. No, it's not about me. It's you. You're the one being sensitive, engaging that micro invalidation. So basically getting them try to see the perspective of that other person. Hey, your intentions might have been good, but guess what? This is how this was hurtful. Can you see the impact of what you engaged in? So I hope that was helpful. And I know we're like a minute over, so I'm going to look at Leah and Heidi for how to.
Well, thank you so much. I actually kind of love when we go over, because it means the content was timely and lively, and we really appreciate the conversations and everything that you were putting in the chat. Really quickly, did you guys have any closing thoughts before we head into our next session next week?
I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited I'm hoping to listen in. So yes, I think this is really important, and we really appreciate everyone joining us today. Just remember though, we raised some awareness about this. I think what Shauna and I really wanted this to turn into though is action, right? Not just, okay, I learned about this. Think about what's a tip you took away today that you're going to put into practice. What's something that you're going to keep doing, something you're going to stop doing, and what is something you're going to start doing, so we can all become better allies.
I love that sentiment. Well, thank you again to Shauna and Cherie and Heidi for moderating today. This was a wonderful and thought-provoking discussion. So thank you all also for joining us. We hope you are leaving today's session with some tools that are going to help empower you to advocate for yourself and others in the face of harassment. We have dropped the link for next week's session, so we hope to see you the same time next week, and we'll follow up with further details via email. So thanks again for joining us.
Everyone.
Safe and be well, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. See ya.
Thank you.